I want you to imagine something. One of your family members, maybe a grandparent or aunt or uncle, has just died. It's a solemn occasion. Everyone is dressed in black and rain is beating down outside. During the wake or whatever flavour of mourning ceremony, you happen to be standing by when one of your distant relatives walks up to the casket. There's the muffled sound of sobbing around you, rain's beating down outside, and everyone has a deep, gloomy expression on their face. But that doesn't stop this relative stepping up to the casket with a grin on their face. Taking a quick glance inside, they turn to you with a wink and say, "Hey, at least I'm better off than that guy." It is my genuine belief that the worst thing to happen to modern writing, and frankly artistic expression, across all mediums is Joss Whedon, and by extension, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Aaron Sorkin bears some responsibility as well, but everyone is just so fucking smart and snarky in a way that is unnatural and grating. The knock-on effect from this trend has been immeasurable. From video games, to books, to movies, to TV shows, the rise of disingenuous characters and writing is all currently feeding into what I talked about recently with cultural nihilism. If the shtick of any creative work is to point and laugh the moment anything serious or sincere happens on screen, then what's the point of engaging with it in the first place? This, in turn, encourages content-driven slop rather than actual intent or artistic expression. If one assumes their audience has the attention on their phone the whole time, it doesn't really matter what the quality of the writing is, does it? So let's unpack this, one wink at the camera at a time. We'll be here all day if I have to chart this stuff back to Buffy the Vampire Slayer or sitcoms in the 90s, so let's focus on where the culture of subversion really emerged at first, superhero films. Love it or hate it, Marvel hit on a formula that made some serious bank. The Avengers saga made a lot of money, so naturally, the company behind it kept making more and more and more of it. You can thank the fact these same cookie-cutter films kept making money are the reason the superhero genre has become so goddamn exhausting today. But it's also where the first lesson of today really began to show itself. Sincerity isn't cringe. I've banged on about this plenty of times already, but one of the key traits of modern writing is in how it's terrified of allowing the audience to actually be in the moment, or worse, feel something. Thus, the sludge that has covered almost all of media like a self-aware slime is intended to veil itself in the dreaded irony and, naturally, self-deprecation. A man or woman expressing their feelings, let alone something as sacrilege as a kiss to save a romantic payoff, is apparently too childish or boring for modern audiences, thus we need the comic relief character to interject. Once again, this is part of the much larger push to subvert everything and the idea subversion should happen for subversion's sake. That, and the audience must be stupid and talked down to like a 5-year-old. Since Joss Whedon, James Gunn, and everyone else who continues to imitate them across every fucking medium imaginable doesn't understand this, allow me to make it clear. Sincerity is not, in fact, cringe. The word cringe alone is probably worth a whole series of videos analysing and deconstructing as it is, but emotional sincerity is not the setup for a laugh track, nor is it gay or queer-coded or whatever, for Sam and Frodo to have gone through hell and back together. I don't want to get too off track because there are so many ways this culture of snarky, insincere irony has manifested itself, and in turn caused tons of issues on its own, but as I was talking about recently, it's more important than ever to push back against the destructive nature of subversion in storytelling and the idea that heartfelt, authentic writing and characters are not commercially viable. To even be thinking about whether something is commercially viable to begin with is enough of a poison chalice as it is. If we assume all the other issues that have come from modern writing didn't compound this even further for a second, the idea of writing every character as the same smarmy, quip-filled template as everything else today is not only so exhausting, it shows you don't really care enough to say or express anything. The whole whole "are video games art" is a tried and true dead horse we've been over already. Personally, I don't care whether they are or not, and why bother wasting your breath on something purely subjective anyway? But if we assume they are art for a moment, do you really think that art means anything if it has to make a joke every 5 bloody seconds? Do you think that it will stay with people, resonate with them emotionally, even on a spiritual level, if the punchline that has been mathematically calculated down to the nearest second, like every other story, takes precedence over authenticity or immersion? It's something we could keep going in circles about for hours, and this is hardly new territory anyway. Point is, if you can't take your work seriously, then why on earth would you think that anyone else will? It's important to write a range of interesting, deep characters that are not defined by irony or smart-ass comments, for the same reason it is their entire life doesn't just revolve around being queer, or politically active, or what the color of their skin is, or the amount of people they've slept with. It's something I've banged on about enough already, but at this rate I will still be saying this to the day I die. Right people, flaws and all, imperfect, cruel, but also hopeful, idealistic, and sincere. Modern media and storytelling has been overrun with the exact same template, copied over and over and over again beyond recognition. You'd think people have forgotten what it once meant to have a proper romance or inner monologue on screen. It's become so fucking infantile. There's a good reason why many of us return to archetypal classic stories and the films, books, TV shows, and so forth we grew up with. Nostalgia plays a part in it, sure, but it's also that these were made in a time where children were allowed to be children. Men and women didn't have to veil their true feelings behind a snide disdain for those around them, or play the part of bumbling comic relief or the mouthpiece for a board of executives. Maybe if all these people stopped joking around, we could have something to look up to instead of turning on each other. I'll end this section with this. It's far easier to take a cop-out, to poke fun at something and tear it down, than it is to build something and be sincere instead. Be brave. That is what true, timeless art requires. If the quality of writing itself wasn't bad enough, that storytelling across all mediums right now wasn't mired in such god-awful, self-aware crap. Trying to be sincere still wouldn't be enough. Why? Because for much the same reason irony and self-deprecation has become a cheap cop-out to avoid writing characters with actual personality, flaws, or charm, so too has the multiverse done for Stakes. Whether or not something is explicitly written as a multiverse is beside the point, because the cynical hell of every franchise ever needing to be turned into a cinematic universe in the wake of Marvel's success has had the same effect. Did a character die in your story? It doesn't matter. They're alive in every other permutation. Need to quickly fill a role in your story? It's like pulling a rabbit out of a hat. Multiverses are literally hack writers' get out of jail free card. Who cares about needing to write consistent characters? Different personality traits can be written in when the universe collides. Yay! I've been ragging on Marvel, DC, and everyone else that's been trying to emulate this soulless, lazy shit enough already, so let's have a look at something else instead. At the very end of Starfield, when you're supposed to be at the zenith of this big, dramatic journey that spans the stars, your player character has the opportunity to ask a version of yourself for answers about literally anything. This is what Bethesda thought would be cool and deep as a response.
Unknowingly, you just answered your own questions. For who creates things but creators? That is what they have been named throughout the endless circle of time.
That is the laziest writing I've ever seen. Somehow even worse than Fallout 4, like Mama Murphy getting visions to move the plot along by taking Jet. What would be the dramatic climax in other stories? Emil and all the other people who should feel embarrassed for working on this pathetic excuse of a game, instead of explaining anything about how the universe works, who created it, who or what could be behind it all, they essentially wave it all away with the kind of line a 12-year-old writing their very first fanfiction would think is cool. Starfield is creatively bankrupt, and the best example I could ever have hoped for in everything wrong with the Radiant system. Instead of committing to a singular vision with a single cast of characters, The prevalence of multiverse cliches means that writers and creatives aren't interested in actually defining their world on its own merit, because the loopholes and gaps in logic become part of it by design. There's the self-referential aspect of this. Again, look at superhero films and getting people to watch every film for the chance of the company throwing a bone to audiences with a brief cameo by someone from another, but the impact this has had on stakes and, once again, sincerity beggars belief. To hammer this point home, let's look at one more example: Clair, Obscur, Expedition 33, and the third act twist. I don't usually give spoiler warnings, but given this is a very story-heavy game and was released this year, now would be the time to stop watching this video, or at least skip to the conclusion. So there you go. Here be monsters. Proceed at your own peril. I have issues with Clair Obscur. The parry mechanic being insanely unreliable drove me up the wall. But these are mostly nitpicks, that pale in comparison to the overall story and experience. Since a lot of what I talk about and criticize on this channel is about being authentic and sincere, the breath of fresh air that Sandfall Interactive and Expedition 33 represented is something truly beautiful, and I'm glad it's been getting the attention it deserves. Unfortunately, for such a creative, interesting world, full of authentic, memorable characters, at the end of Act 2, it tips over into a fourth wall breaking meta-narrative, and in doing so, it invalidated the investment I felt in everything that had come before. I understand why Sandfall did this. It's a very obvious allegory. Hell, not even allegory, because the subtext is literally stated out loud about the creative process and getting attached to art. That being said, the characters and story I cared far more about are all pushed to the side, and it turns out it never really mattered, did it? Mayel is revealed to be the big, special OC all along. The struggle against the Patris never really mattered, and the girl with the cracked mask or that old guy in the suit proves that some mysteries are better left unanswered. I suppose on some level, this was like jumping the shark, that the central conflict and emotional world-ending stakes about trying to stop the Patris suddenly take a hard turn in Act 3, and veers off into a whole other story that I don't really care about. It was Gustav, Lune, CL, my hero Esquier, and yeah, Mayel in her original form that I cared about. It was the Gamage, the end of everything and everyone that I cared about. But now it's clear that they never really mattered, that it was a fantasy, and they didn't truly exist in the first place. I'm not saying that Sandfall didn't care. Of course they did. It's ultimately their story, and they can do whatever they like. But the meta-commentary about the nature of art and being able to let go cheapens what was, at least up until that point, a story that had me deeply engaged and rooting for all these beautifully realized characters. It does try to shoehorn them back in as Act 3 becomes very rushed and on rails, but it's too late. It can't be undone. When it turns out Mayel or Alicia or whatever can just magic the characters that died back into existence, why should I care anymore? It's the same thing as a multiverse. Anything can happen at any time. So what's the point in caring? I look at Gustav or Lune now and they're just puppets. Well written, well acted puppets, but once the game shows its hand, the magic is ruined. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is a visually beautiful work of art. It's undoubtedly a labor of love made by people who cared, but the emotional core collapses in on itself at the third act, and it never recovers. Over the past few weeks, since I started making these videos again, I've done my best to cover a lot of topics that either I find interesting or encourage people to look past the traps or cultural issues and make the stories and characters they want to tell. Except for the video covering cultural nihilism, it's this video in particular that I wanted to talk about the most, because these two issues are what's truly holding good storytelling, good art, back. When faced with the death of a character or a burgeoning relationship and your first instinct is to use some tired, witty one-liner to break the tension, it shows you have so little care in getting people invested in your story or the stakes that why should any of us care either? Similarly, if everything is possible, there's a parallel dimension full of every character, every possibility imaginable. What's the point in getting invested in the here and now when your story or world doesn't mean mean anything in the overall scheme of things. At the heart of any good story is two things: sincerity and stakes. Instead of worrying about being called cringe by a bunch of terminally online losers, or that you have to cross-reference an entire universe instead of focusing in, have faith in your own writing and creative ability to tell the emotionally resonant and sincere stories you want to tell. We need that, and the world needs what you can offer it too. If you want your work to truly be art, don't follow trends or cliches. Go your own way and tell the stories that mean the most to you.